It's the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the most rewarding. There was no part of me that had sat as an actor thinking I could be a director. The book was just this absolute lavish feast of a place to go and gather everything that I needed.
As part of producing Inside the Arthouse, we see a lot of movies. And while many are compelling and well-made, naturally, some of them stand out. Of all the films we've seen so far this year, Don't Let's Go to the Dogs Tonight has definitely moved to the top of the list. Based on a memoir of the same name by Alexandra Fuller, this powerful film has been brought to the screen by first-time director Embeth Davidtz, an actress who's worked with filmmakers like Steven Spielberg, Robert Altman, and Sam Raimi. Miss Davidtz draws from her own experience growing up in apartheid South Africa to bring striking authenticity to the story of a family of white farmers in Zimbabwe, told through the eyes of young Bobo, played with extraordinary depth by newcomer Lexi Venter, as she is witness to the political upheaval in a land on the brink of change. A hit at the Telluride and Toronto International Film Festivals, Don't Let's Go to the Dogs Tonight is opening on July 11th in New York and Los Angeles before rolling out nationally. You won't want to miss our conversation with Embeth Davidtz, where we discuss the journey from actor to filmmaker and the challenges of adapting this beloved memoir on Inside the Arthouse, starting now.
Hi, I'm Greg Lumley.
And I'm Raphael Sparge.
And welcome to another episode of Inside the Arthouse. Today we're joined by filmmaker Embeth Davidtz, who's here to talk about your new film, Don't Let's Go to the Dogs Tonight.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah. So this was a book that you found that spoke to you, that really echoed your experience of South Africa and your travels. It's so impossible to make any film, and for you to be your first film, and you to be an actress directing and then producing, wearing all these hats. How hard was this to get off the ground?
Oh, I have so much to say. Really, the strongest thing I think I have to say, because sometimes when I'm talking about the making of the movie or the child or the other things, I don't emphasize enough how absolutely everything the book was. So I read this memoir, and the story of Alexandra Fuller's childhood in Zimbabwe. It was all over Africa, but Zimbabwe is where we set this film. The writing, so the actor part of me, the characters that she created, the way she wrote Bobo, and the way she describes her mother. So the actor part of me was like all the antennae were up and every light was going off. And I went, my God, these characters, that somebody could play these characters. And then the story, the way she tells the story, this very sweeping story of her life. So the book, the memoir, was everything. And that was the thing that there was no part of me that had sat as an actor thinking I could be a director. I only ever thought I could be an actor, but I fell so much in love with this story, her story, and these characters, that then I thought, let me option it. It was sort of, I can option it. I think I could see this as a film. And then I couldn't find a screenwriter. I thought, let me take a stab at it myself. I've read enough good scripts and bad scripts to know the difference really between what does a script need. And again, the book was just this absolute lavish feast of a place to go and gather everything that I needed. The vignettes and stories of her life, the character of her as a little girl who becomes the central character in the film, the stories of her mother and her mother's mental illness and suffering and belief that she had the claim to that land. It gave so much. So I then battled along, and I was really happy in the interview that I saw you guys did with Walter Salas, where he said, well, it took about 7 years to perfect the script, because
right.
it took me about that long. And I thought, wow, I'm incredibly slow. But just the layering and the layering and the layering. And then I pulled things from the book, which is where most of it came from. But then there were things I had to sort of concentrate in one time and place, and I made it the war. At one point, I sort of told the story just as a third-person point of view, but then I made it from the child's point of view, because that gave me so much more freedom, particularly with the race stuff. I could say things that I couldn't say otherwise, because a child can say what they hear, and we sort of can accept it in a strange way. We don't accept it, but we hear it differently.
Right.
So that was its own episode. And then the directing, it came to me because I couldn't find a director that I thought really would understand the material. I showed it to a few people and they sort of got it but didn't. And then I just kind of was left holding the baby, and I thought, I just have to carry this baby over the finish line. So it's the hardest thing I've ever done.
Oh my goodness.
In my life. But also the most rewarding, and with a lot of help from a lot of other people, a great cinematographer who really understood the way I wanted the world to look, an amazing cast, and so much luck in finding every character. The actors are all so good. A fantastic editor who, I didn't know the first thing about editing. I knew what I could see in my mind, but I didn't know how to execute it. So I had a fantastic editor who was like, and then by the end, it was like being in lockstep with somebody who you were sparking these ideas off, a brilliant composer who did the score that was so wonderful. So the actor in me knew what I wanted the story to be, because, and again, I go back to, and you'd know because you're an actor, what it's like to have a script where there's a weak spot. But when you think the 7 years of building, I built the house and I thought, God, I think the house is strong enough. I think there's nowhere that it could fall down. And thank God, because every day on set was an emergency and a weather thing or a child thing or a dog thing or a something that it was pretty clear what the dialogue was, what the scenes were, what we needed. And so we could get what we needed to make a movie.
Well, I think it's fabulous that you ended up wanting to direct a film. We've been having a run of interviews lately with first-time female filmmakers. And I saw your film at the Seattle Film Festival. And at the festival, I saw several films by first-time female filmmakers. It's not that a man couldn't have directed the film, but I think there maybe would have been a different perspective on it,
yes,
perhaps.
For sure. Actually, that's a really interesting point because it's a very female-driven film. You know, the main characters, I guess, are Sarah, Bobo, and then Nicola. And it's sort of like this triangle between those three women. And I just wonder, you know, there's so many filmmakers, male filmmakers that I so admire, but there is something about the way that women maybe look at things and look at other women. And so I enjoyed that so much and loved sort of weaving that together.
I mean, there are political things in the film, and I want to discuss them. But again, there's so much about these relationships, not just those three, the sister, the absent sister.
Yeah. I know. And the mother. So again, as a woman, you know, and a woman, and I think also women see the world. There's so many fantastic, you know, men, cinematographers and, you know, visual creators that see things a certain way. But I feel like what I was able to do was sort of paint it with the paintbrush almost of a mother myself, as a child myself, because I was a child, not in that country, not in Zimbabwe, but in South Africa. I saw things the way a young female child would see things. And I think the female gaze is very specific here, as opposed to the male. It's a very patriarchal society. Women were very much subjugated. African women, even more so. So, you know, there's also shades of it there. And again, I did not set out to be, I'm going to be a female filmmaker. I'm going to be a filmmaker. It just more was the burning desire to tell the story.
It's astonishing what you did. It really, it's astonishing. I mean, and just even the dynamics of being in a scene and then directing a scene and then working with, in this case, a astounding young actress who is not an actor, and how you navigated that. I mean, how do you set the shot, be in the frame, you know, deal with, you know, helping this young actress?
Listen, there's a super unsung hero in all of this too. A fantastic first AD. I have to tell you, I never valued my first assistant director until this moment. This man of his brain and his humility and his gentleness and his calm and his kindness. So he was sort of like this engine that was underneath, just sort of turning. I sort of felt like we were the Titanic, and he was this huge power underneath. Ended up giving him a producing credit because I just could not have done it with Tabani Gigabe is his name. And he allowed us to have a structure. We never dropped a shot. We never dropped a scene. So knowing we would come in the day, but again, a really great shorthand with my DP where it's just like, this is the way the scene is going to be. This is how I see it. And he's like, perfect. How about this lens? And I had these two little things I could look at. Yes, that's great. Go in tighter. My thing was always tighter, because I wanted to be right on that child's beautiful face. But I also wanted to be right inside her mind because everything is coming from her. So the closer we were with her. Then I soon realized with a little 7-year-old who isn't an actor, that keeping her busy is the best thing. So for me, the best scenes were give her the sneaker to play with, put her in a tub, let her play with her doll and the water, allow her own dog, that's her dog, in all the scenes so that I could just capture, and then always have a second camera going to capture every second, get the dirty toenail, catch her running through the field with the sun, catch the wind in the trees. And all of those in the editing room were like this gold mine that I had. But for me, the first day after I was like, okay, we'll shoot in this direction first, keeping myself off camera. Okay, then we'll shoot in this direction. Mostly I'm off camera. Then when we had to turn around and it was me, I was like, oh my God, this is awful. This is awful.
Yeah.
And that was the flying by the seat of my pants moment, because I didn't have time. We only have the child for 3 hours a day.
Right.
3 hours a day. So
I know those days. You come in a
panic. Yes.
Right.
So I was in a lather for the 34 days of shooting, and we would do all the stuff. The most important stuff to get was her, because I knew I could always cut to voiceover and I could be on her, or get that thing of her foot, or get that shot of the dog or the decaying bone on the ground, because I can use voiceover there and I can use poetry, or I could use music there. It was always like the voiceover became such a key thing, both to get inside of her mind, to see the prejudice and the way that she thinks and what she'd learned from the adults around her. But also it was a great escape hatch for me as a director and an editor. And for myself, I could not watch playback. There was no time. I'd say to the operator, was it in focus? Do we have it? We have it. I feel like I got there. Let's just do one more, like the big scene when Nicola, loses it near the end. I felt like I got there. I hated watching myself when I first started editing, because I'm actually an actor that really relies on directors. I value a director so much. And so I would see myself and think, God, if I'd had a really good director, they could have pushed me that much further. It just was what it was. But by then, the movie had really, in my mind, was everything from the child's point of view, and that was the most important thing to get. So I got enough of what I needed for myself. But it is an acrobatic act that I don't want to go through again.
It's really, your performance is also beautiful, because
don't give yourself.
Yeah, because there's so many traps there. She could have just been sort of she's a complex woman, and there's a lot going on, and she's not just a kind of the angry alcoholic.
Thank you.
There's which is a trap, and you there's so much there, and your relationship with her. And
again, I have to say, you have to go back to the book, because if you read her memoir, she talks about her mother's. This is Alexandra Fuller, her mother's mental illness, but her mother with so much love, and her mother's racism, which is so diametrically opposed to who Alexandra Fuller is as a human being. And yet she was still able to love that mother, that very broken, troubled mother. And so much was given to me from the book, so I just can't say enough about how, thank God for that, because it could imprint in me enough of what I think I needed to do, because I had no time to rehearse or do more than 1 or 2 takes.
All right. Let's take a look at a clip.
What are you going to do, man?
If I find somebody who's cut my fences, I'll shoot them.
Oh. Mum says she'll die for this land. She says if she doesn't have a gun, she'll fight for the farm with her bare hands. I believe her.
Shit.
Can I see? Mum, can I look?
Damn it.
Some of them are quite fat.
Yeah, on my grazing.
Mum, am I African?
No, Bobo.
Are you?
No.
Is it because we don't have brown skin, black skin?
It's complicated.
Is it because we weren't born here?
No.
There's a lot going on there.
A lot going on.
Yeah.
A lot going on. Yeah.
For people who are not familiar with the historical context, you want to provide a little background for what's
so
for the film?
And I always try and keep the two countries separate. The country I lived in, South Africa, had its journey politically and to democracy, and then Zimbabwe had its. I had my experience in South Africa. There are a lot of the layers that overlap, but it was very different in that Zimbabwe had an incredibly violent war that went on for many, many years. Yes. And it's a character in the movie. It's the setting of the film, and that sort of feeling one hopes of sort of disquiet or doom that's rumbling underneath is that a violent war has taken place. It's meant to be a ceasefire, but even the ceasefires weren't ever held for very long. And essentially it was the African people fighting to get their land back, to get their rights back, because they had none. It was completely a white supremacist run world. And I had my own experience in South Africa when we moved there from America of walking into a world where, again, the black man had no power, zero. I mean, I really hoped that I told this story as objectively as I could to give the grace that the original landowners, this is why I had this whole thing with the ancestors, because I wanted there to be a sense of whose land was this originally, and they are powerless, the Africans that live there, but they are losing, and then ultimately in the election they lose, and that's where Nicola, the mother character, falls apart, because so many were unwilling, still are, to accept that it's not theirs, that it doesn't belong to them. And that's really sort of the crux of the matter for Nicola. And Bobo's character, you see her searching and you see her asking the questions of, well, are we African? Who belongs here? It's all about ownership. Whose is this? And again, it's, watching it now, sort of Nicola's avoiding really. I would sit down my children, I think I would, and say, this is what it is, but she doesn't actually answer a lot of her questions.
She doesn't want to answer them herself.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean,
there's such a way, that was the survival.
Yeah. It was a happy accident, because I saw your film, and then the next day I saw a documentary on Leni Riefenstahl, which is going to be coming out in September, and hopefully we'll have that filmmaker on. Now, I don't want to equate what was happening in Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, with the Holocaust necessarily, or the complicity of Leni Riefenstahl with your character, but I was struck with this idea of looking at people who we now see were on the wrong side of history, and yet trying to understand their perspective in that time.
It's very hard to. It's very, very hard to. And I did not want to give a sympathetic viewpoint of, I wanted to show whites behaving badly. I wanted to make the anti out of Africa. I didn't want it to be a dreamy, romantic, not at all. I really wanted to be that's why the maggots and the rotting bones and the idea of this dirty white farmhouse and the drunkenness and the things that go on. Not to say that was every white person living in those countries at the time, but I saw a lot as a child.
There was a moral rot.
Yes, there was a moral rot. And as a child that arrived from America, you can't lie to children. Kids, that's what Bobo's looking at and saying, what is it that I'm seeing here? Because kids see it, I remember it. And so even when trying to establish characters, pulling things out of the book, making up a few things along the way, I had some templates from the things that I'd experienced as a child and templates from Alexandra Fuller's book of whites behaving badly that was very easy to put there. There's complexity to it. There are moments where you realize Nicola lost children, and then that's, why she could be more connected to the land. But at the end of the day, the way colonialism worked is they went in not saying, let's share this, let's do this nicely together. It was very much, we're taking this and we will die, we'll take our last breath fighting for it.
Although in many cases, there are people that have been there for generations.
Some have stayed.
In some cases.
Some have stayed. And honestly, I go back and having shot this in South Africa, seeing actually some quite wonderful integration. And in interesting ways, I think people get shocked when I say this. I have found that when I've been in South Africa, it feels like a much more integrated society to me than America does in the last, I'd say, 10 years. This was surprising to me.
Was that because of the Truth and Reconciliation? Because of
I
what
think
they
the way
faced it?
yes, I think that had a lot to do with it. I think Mandela and the transition had a lot to do with it. I never lived in Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe had a much more, I mean, it's very tragic that as that Land Rover drives away at the end, part 2 of this would be what was the calamity that befell the African people who finally inherit their land back, but they're left with this very deformed organism that's been left behind by white supremacy.
So broken and here, right, yeah.
And never to be fixed. So, there's no real happy ending here. It's not, the hope is Bobo, because what Bobo sees out that back window is she knows what Sarah gave her. Nobody else turns around, and I don't want to give away the ending. None of the other family members look back. And I had a discussion with a friend who's an academic at Northwestern, and she said, well, I wish you'd put in a shot of, of just Sarah standing back normally or Sarah not looking. And I just said, but it's what Bobo saw. When Bobo looks back, what does she see? And if you speak to Alexandra Fuller, she will always say that the indigenous people, particularly the women that she knew there, are what saved her and somewhat resurrected her when she left Africa. It's the thing that gave her really the love, I think, in a way that her mother couldn't give her, she got from this nanny particularly. And that is so in her gaze, that's what she looked like.
That's a perfect transition to the next clip, actually, where we see Bobo and Sarah together.
Oh, great. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Thanks.
Give it to me. What is this? This is not what a little girl should be doing, even a little boy. There's something wrong with you. Can you put your hand all the way to touch your other ear? See? Do you know what that means? That means you are too young to go to boarding school and you are too young to be smoking. That's what we say.
There's nothing wrong with me. I'm perfect.
Perfect.
Tell me a story.
Not today, Baba. Not today.
So good.
Their relationship is so beautiful. I mean, there's something very just natural about Lexi Venter, who plays Bobo, but also just the chemistry between the two of them and the way they interact throughout the film. It's amazing.
Yeah. Lexi is just like an open flower that just moves through the world, on the breeze. That's just Lexi. But then this woman, Zikhona Bali, who played Sarah, I met with many, many actors, and the second I saw her face, and her audition, but more, she is as peaceful, as deep, as quiet, as zen, as wonderful as that character. I just couldn't imagine anybody else playing it. And they did have a beautiful, just that playful scene in Sarah's house as well. She managed to contain and direct Lexi, because Lexi's a lot to manage in a scene. She, hitting marks, learning lines. You don't give her lines. You would just call lines off screen and just sort of wing it as I went along. Because if I gave her a scene to learn, then actually the scene wouldn't work, because then it would become performed.
Then she was acting.
So the best way was almost to be off screen and throw ideas at her. That's why a lot was done in voiceover as well. Little things like I could say, say it again. Are we African? And then she could repeat it and do it. But I didn't ever have her learn a scene. A lot was done in editing. Zikhona had such a gentle, motherly way with her and such a playful way with her that so much was magic. Spielberg used to say 99% of it is in casting, and there it was. It was in the casting of them,
Did you test them together, or did you get them together out in some kind of way just to see if there was going to be
Just in
rehearsal?
I had rehearsals for about 4 days before we started shooting, and they were great then. But no, I individually knew, the casting was only because I've suffered as an actor through casting before. I felt such empathy for anybody that was coming in and reading or auditioning for it. And the little kids immediately became clear, I don't want a child that's learnt a way of acting. And the adults, so many beautiful performances. But Fumani, who plays Jacob, as well as her, just appeared as who they were, and they were right for it. And then there's so much less of a burden on a director trying to get a performance out of somebody because they're it.
Right. They just show up. The most difficult thing is just getting them in front of the camera. Right. Yeah. No. You find a story you like. You write the script because you can't find a writer. You decide to direct it because you can't find a director. And then you have to walk essentially in somewhere. And I know Trevor Noah was sort of participated as a producer, executive producer. But how were you able to get over to people who would then have to sort of essentially help finance the film? That you were the one to do this, and that you had the I say this, you having accomplished an extraordinary thing because it's incredible. But I just wonder how you communicated that.
We used some of our own money. We begged, borrowed, and stole from people. I think a lot of people, we had so little money that the little bits and pieces that we put together were people who really looked at the script and said, I see what that story is, and I think they could see the value of the story. We got very lucky. Trevor came in way late after the film was made. One of my executive producers is an acquaintance of Trevor's, and she sent the trailer to him, and he said, oh my God, I need to see this film. So she sent a link to him, and he reached out and said, I'd actually like to come on board as an executive producer, which is, when I tell you, miracles. Like, who hands you that? Yeah. Where do you get that handed to you, So for me, oh my gosh, I thought, and then we had a talk. I said, well, we had to have a creative discussion, and, you put in your name on it. What does it mean? And he just said, Embeth, I feel the message of this film. I want to be behind the message of the film. I love what you did with it. I know. So again, the terror of I'm telling a story that's volatile that I could get criticized for, that gave me some, some peace or some feeling of, okay, he heard what I was trying to say, and now we can talk about it.
Yes, right? And he's a powerful advocate for this as well.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then, interestingly, American producers were very scared of. Nobody wanted to go near it. They like this.
I bet sort of a story about Africa through a white point of view.
The white thing. We don't want to touch it. And I said, I just know that I'm doing this in honor of the African people in this. I know how to tell this story, even though it's from the white point of view. I can understand why it was scary to them. So there was somewhat of a blind leap of faith on my part, and then people blindly leaping and having faith in me. I was very lucky. And so that part wasn't that hard, as long as I didn't try and do it from America. When I did it from over there, I think the eyes upon it were more understanding and gentle and got what I was trying to do. And so they were like, yes, we're on board.
That is lucky, particularly over the past 5 or 6 years when telling a story about Africa through a white perspective would have been really challenging.
Yeah, and I think, the ending I came up with, it's not in the book. And I think the purists who love the book might be really annoyed by the ending and say, well, what is that? Why is that there? For me, it was that's what's coming from my heart. That's what I am feeling. The whole purpose of this is what does Bobo leave with? And I think possibly that is also the thing that, and I wasn't even being that calculating about it, that got it over the finish line to get it made. Because I think that final shot is possibly what made anybody willing to invest time or money in the film say, I see what she's trying to do.
On paper, when you see it, of course, it's from the moment she arrives, and we get sort of pulled into the world. It makes such complete sense. But again, you walk through a lot of fire rings to get there.
A lot of fire, a lot of even all the time. So far, knock on wood, I haven't had to face any really scary attacks about race or who are you to tell the story. I can only tell the story that I believe the book handed to me, and I guess one can also say, what is the value in telling what you knew or experienced yourself? I'm certainly, I think, showing not a happy example of what I think I saw and experienced. And I think, at the time that we were filming, look at what's happening in the world, the wars, the Ukraine, Russia, Gaza, Israel just never ends. And there are children watching everywhere, continuing to. There are children listening to the news on the way over here. It's so, again, even though that's not a war where necessarily there were bombs going off or being dropped out of airplanes, it was a moment in time where children were taking in the violence, both black and white children.
100%.
Yeah.
And you set that up just from the moment the moment the film starts. That whole sequence. Yeah.
Look, it's a deep film, and it's set in a particular time and place, and I don't think it's specifically trying to address issues that are going on in the United States, but there is an American audience that's going to go to see it, hopefully, and embrace it. And I think maybe it does have something to say about, a lot of the debates that we're having here in this country right now about privilege, of course, about culpability. What is the debt that we owe for past mistakes? Without saying I'm guilty of X, Y, or Z myself, but still, I can't deny that these kinds of things happened. So was any of that on your mind as you were making it, or was it really very specifically focused on this story that's being told?
It was always on my mind.
I was giving you an out there.
I'm sorry. It was always on my mind because that's the sort of meta over everything. Because you can't, again, it's both, right? Oh my gosh, there's a story that so represents and echoes so much of my own childhood. Oh my gosh, there's so many things that resonate with me. However, look at the state of the world. Look at what we're in. And what are we trying to do? Walter said it in his interview too, what was happening in Brazil? What in the sort of last 10 years has echoed what happened back at the time that the film was made? And so history is always repeating itself. There's always a reflection back in this sort of hall of mirrors. And it's hard not to, there's some tough scenes. And the scene where Nicola throws the pot and the woman comes to her for help. And I was standing there as a white woman, South African, ex-South African, but a woman with a South African accent in front of my beautiful black crew who, and Tabani and I, it was funny actually. After I did that scene, he's like, he muttered swear words under his breath, but he hugged me and I just said it was a really hard scene to do because any of those things, I saw things like that take place as a child. So I was both in my history remembering something, in my present trying to tell something that was historical, but always aware of the world the way that it is right now and how much and how little has changed,
Right, and the wounds that exist, that continue to exist, that you're literally acting out.
Yes.
And you're directing it and you're setting it in motion. I mean, that's complicated.
And the wounds perpetuate, right? So you see, there's certainly a lot in the world that, is baffling right now and that I can sort of question and then sort of see it repeat and repeat. It's very hard as a parent too. I have children that are starting out and I would love to say, none of this happens, but my kids are seeing the world as it is today and going, gosh, there's a lot that still isn't fair.
And as parents, sometimes we have to say,
that's life, right?
Well, that's life. Or yes, maybe we could have done better in leaving the world to you, or certainly, or our parents could have done.
Yeah. Or what can you be aware of? Yeah. What can this teach you? Where's your consciousness?
But you're very human, and maybe that's some bit of hope for all of us if we can
I hope.
Obviously, you hadn't seen I'm Still Here as you were making this film.
No.
We've seen it since, so you see sort of certain echoes. But were there some films that you looked at to help get you? I mean, obviously, you have a ton of experience making movies as an actor.
Something that's always captivated me is the way that children see the world. And maybe it's because I remember childhood for me was being in America, then moving to Africa, a lot of upset, a lot of turmoil. And I think a child that exists in a world where there's a ton of turmoil remembers all that on a cellular level. So that's the part of me I think that went, needing to create or needing to tell something. And so the films like Spielberg's Empire of the Sun
Also children's, yeah.
I just loved the way Christian Bale's entitled, sort of spoiled, imperious child by the end is broken. He's broken by the war, and he's broken by the treatment of the adults around him. I always think of that Malkovich character and how he treats him. And then Jojo Rabbit, I think he did an amazing job of making a child, a horrible little anti-Semitic child with his best friend is Hitler, talk about dirty Jews, and yet though you see that the little boy who says, I need a cuddle, his little friend who comes and goes, I'm just going to go home because I need a cuddle from my mom, and that you're going back and forth between terrible things that Bobo will say, my mom says Africans are all untrustworthy, but then she's trying to figure it out for herself. So there's something in this razor's edge of the child questioning and their eyes opening that I think, oh God, I remember that being that myself. And so it's sort of this fertile place for me to sort of pose some of the questions or replay some of the things that I remember thinking myself. Kids, something about children and using kids. Children are so charming and disarming, when I look at her again and sort of realize it was the only way to burrow into the story was through this beautiful kid, because it just would have been too horrific to watch Nicola's point of view. I don't think I could ever have told the movie from Nicola's point of view. We had to see Nicola through the child's eyes to see everything that was wrong with her mother.
And also to understand this issue of race and how ideas of race then essentially pass down from one generation to the other.
It's learned behavior.
Right. You're not, because her relationship to Sarah is very clearly warm and connected and, as you say, motherly. But the ideas of race then sort of get
are passed down.
Right.
And so I guess the American audience can look at it and say, if you're watching history take place and sort of realize that our children are watching all the time. I think they're aware of everything, even the subtext, things that are not said, and they're learning, and prejudice feels like it's a learned thing. So there's that sort of an opportunity to, I don't know, maybe highlight that.
Yeah, to talk about that here, obviously, right? Yeah, sort of its resonance, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. How have the audiences responded? I mean, how's it going?
Audiences have been amazing. Also there was a moment when I did think I'm shooting this on an iPhone and it's just going to be a home movie that I'm just doing because I have to do it.
You didn't shoot it on an iPhone.
No. We shot these amazing Tribe 7 Blackwing. We had these beautiful lenses. I had a great cinematographer who knew what lenses to pick because I wouldn't have known. But I didn't go into it thinking about anybody seeing it. So the reward, I didn't do it for that. It wasn't like, we'll get our money back. They'll get their money back. Anybody who put money in the pot did it with the spirit of, go make your movie. Let's see what happens. There wasn't someone has to recoup funds. It wasn't that at all. For us, it was like, God, I hope we can put that money back in the bank one day, but it might not happen. And my husband was incredibly, he knew I needed to do it. I said, I feel like my life depends upon this. I just need to tell this story. It felt like all the years of raising kids and not acting or getting a little tired of acting in some ways, certain things, I felt like I just knew I would have this, it was like a renaissance for me, and to get invited to Telluride, then to get invited to Toronto and hearing people laugh. Oh, and I had the best animal actors in the world, that cat. The audiences would love that.
The cat's
laugh
great.
at the cat and laugh at the dog and laugh at this scamp of a child and then love the film and cry at the end. And I just could get addicted to the feeling of people loving it, and it's a miracle every single day. When I heard you guys wanted to talk to me, there's a miracle in it, because the idea that it made its way from this little idea of I just want to do something meaningful to sitting here is
It's powerful. You've birthed something truly, right?
Yeah. Which is amazing and surprising, and I feel really lucky.
Well, every child is a joy, but this is truly a special child. It's a very special film, and I'm honored. I'm happy that I was able to see it. I'm honored to be able to talk to you. I'm honored to be able to present it to audiences. It's going to be opening here at this theater, and also in New York on July 11th, and rolling out to the rest of the country on August 1st. So people are going to have an opportunity opportunity to see this across the United States.
Yes, which that is even that. The idea that Sony Picture Classics picked it up and are making it available for people to see is wonderful. And then I think eventually down the line in some streaming platform somewhere. But
well, you're going to get criticized for it. I think you know that at some level. But as long as you're not doing something right, if you're not getting some criticism from the extremes, and you're going to get it from both sides.
And I'm open to it because, again, it was what happened. I mean, I guess the criticism could be you gave too favorable of a point of view to the whites, which I really hope I didn't. I really tried not to. I tried to, I remember my editor saying, nobody's going to like your character. And I just said, that's fine. She wasn't meant to be. I'm not trying to make her likable.
Right.
But I think...
But she's not a monster.
She's a human being. I think every human being, and we can look at...
Well, no, but I'm saying that there are people who are going to say, oh, they were monsters.
There were some monsters.
The white farm,
I think the chap that walks into the bathroom and deals with that, that's a monster, and there were monsters.
Yep.
And there are everywhere.
There are monsters.
There are monsters. So, and in a society, you're going to find variations of monsters, right? Degrees of monsterism. So even that makes everyone in that society complicit.
But again, that's what's so interesting, because you walk this line, right? Which is essentially what you talked about with Jojo Rabbit, which is that someone can have an extreme point of view, but they also have these sort of warm, human parts of them as well that are very sensitive and caring and loving and affectionate to, so it's all of it. That's what I was saying, is that you didn't, she's not a monster. Your character.
And I think even the moment where she breaks down or mentions her children that have died, it's not to get sympathy from the audience. I think what we all have to know as we look at the other side, right? When you're looking across a battlefield at the enemy, it's that there are that many facets to the enemy. So the one is the guy that walked into the bathroom, the chap who played Anton. The other is, the wife who is beaten down and ignored by her husband. The other is the woman who lost her children. And all those things together make up the enemy who's over there. So I just think we have to me, the films where the bad guy was just the bad guy, I couldn't get into it enough. And I thought, okay, I'm taking a risk by showing multifaceted people here. I'm happy to discuss it, because I think that that's also what's insidious about how something creeps in. If it's not all bad, let's think about that right now, right? Like the world as it is.
Right. Yeah.
Doesn't all look too bad, right? So can't be that bad. So therefore, but what's creeping in under, it's like, what's the Trojan horse we're riding in on,
Well, I think having Trevor and many other people to be advocates for the film, potential advocates for the film would be fabulous, because I think that's a way of centering the conversation on things that we can agree, as opposed to getting stuck in a discussion of, Zimbabwe descended into a 30-year despotic rule under Mugabe, and was better off, whatever. I mean, we all know where those conversations can go.
But even then, you cannot not say that Zimbabwe descended into that because of what the whites had done.
That's right.
So it really, and I think I showed that. It's like part 2 would be what happened afterwards. That's a different thing to explore in another film, but.
How did the author respond? Have you shown it?
She really liked it, which I was terrified of whether she would or wouldn't. She's funny. She said, the horse wouldn't be that shiny. Our horses didn't look like that, because she's a crazy, full-on horsewoman. And there was one scene from the book, from a different location. It's the scene where Bobo, after Nicola has her collapse, where Bobo goes on her bike and almost runs into the child, and she meets that squatter family. She has her opinions about what that didn't need to be there, but which was, high praise coming from her, that she just even accepted it, because can you imagine someone trying to take on your life and trying to,
That must have, did you sit in the screening with her? Did you
No. No, I was as far away from her as possible. But we spoke afterwards, and I just breathed a really huge sigh of relief, because it's also listen, it's your family, it's yourself.
Yeah.
I'm trying to, and then I'm also fictionalizing parts of it as well in order to tell the story. In the end, do you like the end? Do you not like the end? So yes, thank God she liked it. Nothing will ever be that book. You know, I always go back to it. It's like the Bible for me. And I have my copy where have all the pages, and I even pull dialogue from it, because her dialogue, the way she writes as herself and speaks as herself, or the way her mother spoke, was so rich for me. So nothing will ever be the book. And I always, when we've done Q&As, I always say to audiences, I'm sorry, it's not the book, but it's a movie. It's a piece of the book.
Yes.
They're two separate things, but she didn't hate it. At least I can say that.
This is good. This is wonderful. Yeah. Well, it is a remarkable accomplishment to have worn as many hats as you have, and now to be able to sort of take it out. What an exciting moment for it to kind of just be hitting the world. It's thrilling what you've done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The film is Don't Let's Go to the Dogs Tonight. It's directed by Embeth Davidtz, who also stars in the film. It's being distributed by Sony Pictures Classics. It's opening in New York and Los Angeles on July 11th, and then rolling out to theaters around the country. Please look for it. It's worth seeing.
Yeah. And if you like today's show, please consider liking, subscribing, sharing. We want as many people to know about this movie and just for them to come find it.
Yeah. And thank you, Embeth Davidtz, for joining us inside the Arthouse.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Our show was produced by Raphael Sparge with on-site producer Norrin Dickerson. Supervising producers are Thomas Cassetta and Miles McCreary. Our show was edited by Gabriel Emley and sound mixed by Thomas Cassetta. Our musical theme was composed by Isabel Engman and Gerardo Garcia Jr. Marketing by Gabriel Emley. Show graphics by Jenna DeAngelis. Additional marketing and web design by Stephanie Peters. Filmed at the historic Laemmle Royal Theater in Los Angeles, California. See you next time on Inside the Arthouse. If you like today's show, please consider subscribing to our channel to learn more on Inside the Arthouse.